Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Sermon here at Hyde Park United Methodist. I'm Savanna Beasley, the Assistant Director of Communications.
And I'm Magrey deVega, the Senior Pastor. It's great to do a Beyond the Sermon with you, Savanna. I think this is the first one that you have done with me.
It is. And be prepared, you guys, because I am the wild card. I actually was just saying right before we started that your sermon this week for me was very much like a Taylor Swift mastermind moment.
Wow.
Of, kind of all the things that we've been talking about and a couple things, internally with staff. We did an emotional intelligence retreat a couple weeks ago that kind of tied in a little bit. So, but the prayers, talking about all the different elements of prayers of the past couple months, past year even, of just all the different layers to it that you've kind of built up and have culminated into this perfect little sermon.
First of all, great reference to Taylor Swift. Thanks to my two daughters. I know the reference to both Taylor Swift and the Mastermind song. That's one that they had me listen to. I'd like to think that this past year has been on that level of complexity and interconnectedness that she suggests in that song. But it's not quite to that level. We're really just talking about spiritual practices this year, about reading the Bible back in February and praying over the summer. And it all comes together, at least for now, today in this self-care sermon. So thanks for the compliment. Yes,
definitely. And so actually, one thing that we talked about in that emotional intelligence course, he brought up Greek Stoicism as well.
Right.
And he talked about control, which is something that we talked about a few weeks ago with the Serenity Prayer. Justin talked about giving up control. You mentioned it again today in your sermon, and I would love to talk more about that. And kind of your thoughts on giving up, relinquishing control as a form of self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stoicism is often misinterpreted as not allowing yourself to feel anything or not allowing yourself to have emotions. And that's not quite what Stoicism is about. It's about using your emotions and your feelings and centering them in this sort of three-part framework that I remind myself through this control test bracelet, which is, what are the three things that ultimately I can control? And then I have to release everything else. Number one, I control my character, my integrity. At the end of the day, did I compromise my set of values, or did I live true to everything I believe I need to live into? That is something you can control. And frankly, only you can control your character. Number two, regardless of what happens to you throughout the day, what is it that is your actions and your reactions? You can only control what you do and how you react to things. And then number three, how do you treat other people? Now, you can't control a relationship. That's a two-way thing. So you can't control how the relationship is, but you can control how you treat that other person. And if it fits with your character, and if it fits with what you believe is within your span of actions and reactions, the Greek Stoics would remind us that ultimately that is the only thing that constitutes the virtuous life. And everything else that happens to you, you really need to release. And that has really helped me over the past 10 months or so build what I call in the sermon an inner scaffolding of resilience, so that whatever kinds of winds blow at me, I can still remain fixed and strong. I'm not perfect at it. I'm not like Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus or any of those great Greek Stoics, but that's a good guiding channel for me. Is that helpful for you? Those three ideas about control?
Yeah. No, definitely. I am a person of control. I surprise. I very much value being able to kind of determine, what my day is going to look like as far out as I can go.
Sure.
And then finding my freedoms within that structure, right? And one of those things that helped me quite a bit, and I think also kind of contradict this idea of relinquishing control over the things that you just can't control, right? Is a routine, which is another thing that you talked about today in your sermon. It's something that Matt and I actually talked about in our hosting as well.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit more about the contrast there of the value of a routine, but relinquishing control, and all of it has to do with self-care, but all of it kind of is like pushing against each other with this tense pressure?
That's a great question, because the whole idea of a routine is that it is something that only you can dictate. Like the way you spend your time is ultimately one of the few things that is within your span of control. So the whole idea of developing a daily rhythm, a daily set of practices, is ultimately up to you to control. And at the same time, it is the one thing that feels compromised by all sorts of pressures and deadlines to compromise your time. Like, as much as I have a daily routine, every day there are pressures to spend that morning time in a different way. I might have gotten a restless night of sleep, and so I might want to sleep in a little bit, or I might be feeling the pressure of things that are happening later in the day that I want to spend time on thinking about. So I'll compromise my daily routine in order to get started responding to emails or be thinking about a high pressure meeting later in the day. Or I might have a lot of emotional heaviness with things that I'm just struggling with. There's a lot of pressure from outside to compromise your daily routine. So it is an essential wrestling match every single day. Am I going to spend my time with these daily practices or bend towards something else that feels as important? And the principle is really nothing else can happen productive throughout your day until you've set your mind on your daily practices that will build up that inner resilience. It's hard to do, which is why it can be trial and error. Like the rhythm that I'm on for the past few years is not a rhythm that I could have had years and years ago when I had kids and I was rushing them out the door and doing all sorts of stuff. I had a different routine then. And so your routine may change over time based on your life stage and your life situation. But once you find that routine for that season of your life, stick to it. As much as you can have control over it, stick to it despite all the pressures that might come at you to compromise that routine. Does that kind of make sense to you?
Yeah, it's almost as if they're more of a symbiotic relationship, right?
Yeah,
sure. You can't have the control over the few things you have control over if you don't have, the routine, and the routine helps you maintain. So it kind of, they flow together in a way that helps you grow closer to God. It sounds like it, especially from your perspective. And it is important to acknowledge, that there are different phases of your life where a routine does look different. Like the kids, versus the single life, or, just a 40-hour work week versus retirement. Those are different routines, different forms of things you can control.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's why when I share my routine, it's not prescriptive. I'm not saying this is what you have to do. I'm simply doing this to share the value of it in the hopes that you'll adopt the value of it and then express it in a way that fits for your schedule. And this is nothing new to me. This is John Wesley. And even prior to that, St. Benedict, who talked about a daily routine. In fact, that's why we call ourselves Methodists. We have a methodical, systematic, structured daily set of rhythms in our approach to the Christian faith. And for John Wesley, that is what built resilience within his own spiritual character. So.
Yeah. And I like what you said earlier too about how a lot of factors can play into it, but it is an active choice.
Yeah.
That first thing in the morning, not to hit that snooze button, that first thing in the morning, not to grab your phone and to grab your reading glasses instead of, doom scrolling first to start your day. Right. And it's funny too, because you can really determine to a certain extent of what is giving you that dopamine hit.
That's right.
Right.
That's
so
right.
Either you can read scripture this morning using our daily scriptures page, or you can get on your phone and start looking, and then all you get political or ads or all of those things, and unintentionally you've now brought your mood down rather than lifting yourself up. So it's very...
I'm glad you mentioned the sleep thing, because I've discovered in order for me to stick to this routine, it really matters what time I go to sleep the night before. If I don't get a lot of sleep, then that really pushes the pressure on me the next morning. But it's actually more than that. If I get an adequate night's sleep, I pay attention. I can literally pay attention to what my subconscious is saying to me throughout the night. Sometimes it's through dreams. Oftentimes, I'll sort of wake up sort of half asleep at like 2 or 3 in the morning. I used to get really stressed when I'd wake up at like 3:30 in the morning, like, what's the matter with me? And I forced myself to go back to sleep, and then that would just raise the... Instead, I've learned to just pause in that 3:30 in the morning hour and just say, okay, what is my mind trying to tell me? And sometimes it's just a word or an image or a story or a phrase. I don't know what it is. So I try to befriend that 3:30 moment, because then I remember it. And that's what I bring into my morning prayer time. I say, okay, my mind was trying to tell me something at 2:15 this morning. I wonder if Give Us This Day has anything to tell me about my subconscious. And doggone it. I mean, every single day, there's at least some passage of scripture or a word that meets what I've been tossing around in my head hours before I even open up the daily reading. So sleep is part of the routine, just as my running routine is part of my post-scripture reading routine, where I can let my subconscious congeal all of these ideas. It's really a holistic approach, like I said in the sermon, of body and spirit and mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you said about befriending that 3 a.m. self, right? I definitely fall into that.
Right.
Waking up in the middle of the night and being like, oh my gosh, I just want to go back to bed. What the heck?
Right.
So you also kind of touched on that a little bit in your sermon too, actually, was kind of loving yourself, right? All of yourself, the 3 a.m. self that can't fall asleep, the one that's angry at the enemy, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to love all of yourself before you can love others.
That's right.
And that is kind of something that has been said and has been heavily criticized, I would say, online and in other places, of you have to love yourself before you can love others.
It's true.
And I'd love to get your perspective on that, of loving, because you mentioned it a little bit, but I don't know if you necessarily meant it in the you can't find love or happiness or friendship or anything until you are the perfect version of yourself. I don't think you meant that, but no, it is an interesting idea.
It's an important point. It's a great question, because here's the first thing we learn about human beings in the book of Genesis. Being human is good. When God created human beings, God said it is good. And so it's an important reframe for us to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, it is good to be human. It is good to be me. It is good to have the feelings that I have. It is good to feel stressed. It is good to feel sad. It's not fun, but all of these feelings prove that I'm human. And so if you have a starting point where you are learning to love yourself for being human, rather than trying to diminish your humanity or be upset at the fact that you're feeling these things, that's an incredibly important starting point, because God created each of us in God's image as a human being, and that's a good thing. And I just wonder how your day might be different if you start with that mantra. So.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good place to tie it up for the day. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.